I've been with the Riverside Fire Department for 12 years, and I thought I'd seen every kind of fire imaginable. Structure fires, wildland blazes, vehicle accidents, you name it, I've probably fought it. But what we discovered at the Oakwood Gardens apartment complex on March 15, 2023, still haunts me every time I smell smoke. It was a Tuesday night shift, around 11:47 p.m., when the tones dropped. Engine 23, Truck 12, Battalion 3, Structure Fire, Oakwood Gardens Apartments, 1847 Maple Avenue. Multiple residents trapped, heavy smoke showing. The dispatch crackled through our radio as we rolled out of Station 23 into the cold March rain. I was riding shotgun on Engine 23 that night, with Captain Rodriguez driving and Firefighter Williams in the back seat. The rain was coming down hard, making the streets slick as we responded Code 3 through downtown Riverside. When we turned the corner onto Maple Avenue, we could see the orange glow reflecting off the low-hanging clouds even before the building came into view. The Oakwood Gardens was a 3-story brick apartment building, probably built in the 1970s. Not the worst construction we dealt with, but not the best either. As we pulled up, I could see flames coming from multiple second-floor windows on the east side of the building. Heavy black smoke was pouring out, and I could hear screaming from the upper floors. "Command, Engine 23 on scene," Captain Rodriguez radioed. "We've got a working structure fire, multiple units involved, requesting additional resources." Battalion Chief Henderson was already setting up command when we arrived. "Rodriguez, take your crew and start primary search on the second floor east side," he ordered. "Truck 12 is setting up the aerial, and Engine 47 is laying supply line." We masked up and grabbed our tools. The lobby was filled with smoke, but not as heavy as I expected. The first floor seemed relatively clear, which was strange for a building fire. Usually, smoke rises and fills the stairwells first. As we climbed the stairs to the second floor, something felt off about the smoke pattern. The hallway on the second floor was a nightmare. Heavy smoke, zero visibility, and the heat was intense. We could hear the fire roaring from what sounded like multiple apartments. Williams and I started our primary search while Captain Rodriguez worked on getting water on the fire. "Fire department! Call out if you can hear me!" I shouted as we crawled down the hallway, feeling along the walls for doors. The first apartment we checked, 2A, was locked and relatively cool. No fire extension there. But 2B was fully involved, flames rolling across the ceiling. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The door to 2B wasn't just unlocked, it was propped open. Not wide open, but held slightly ajar with what looked like a small wedge. In 12 years of firefighting, I'd never seen a residential apartment door propped open during a fire. People either flee and slam the door behind them, or they're trapped inside with the door closed. "Cap, you need to see this," I radioed to Rodriguez. But before he could respond, we heard a woman screaming from further down the hall. Williams and I crawled toward the sound, our thermal imaging camera showing a heat signature in apartment 2E. The door was locked, and we could hear her pounding on it from inside. "Ma'am, this is the fire department. We're going to get you out," I shouted as Williams prepared the Halligan to force the door. "Please hurry," she screamed back. "I can't get out. Something's wrong with my door." Williams popped the door, and we found Maria Gonzalez, a woman in her mid-30s, pressed against the back wall of her living room. The strange thing was, her apartment had minimal smoke damage and no fire extension. She should have been able to walk right out her front door. "Why couldn't you get out?" I asked as we helped her toward the stairwell. "The door, it wouldn't open," she gasped. The handle turned, but something was blocking it from outside. That sent a chill down my spine. Williams and I exchanged looks through our masks. After we got Maria down to the paramedics, we went back upstairs to investigate. Sure enough, when I examined her door from the hallway side, I found scratches around the lock mechanism and what looked like fresh tool marks. But it got worse. As we continued our search, we found the same pattern in 3 more apartments on the second floor, 2C, 2F, and 2H. All had evidence of their doors being tampered with from the outside. All were occupied by single women or elderly residents. And all had minimal fire damage despite being in the middle of the fire zone. Meanwhile, apartments 2B and 2D, both occupied by young male tenants who weren't home that night, were completely destroyed. The fire had burned hottest in those units, and both had their doors propped open to feed oxygen to the flames. Captain Rodriguez was getting suspicious too. "This doesn't look right," he told me as we regrouped in the parking lot. "Fire doesn't pick and choose like this." Battalion Chief Henderson called for the fire investigator, but Detective Mills from the arson unit was already on scene. He'd been monitoring our radio traffic and heard enough to know this wasn't a typical structure fire. "Tell me what you found up there," Detective Mills said, pulling out his notebook. I walked him through everything: the prop doors, the tampered locks, the pattern of destruction. His expression got grimmer with each detail. "How many residents were supposed to be in those burned-out units?" he asked. "According to the building manager, 2 young guys, Marcus Thompson in 2B and David Chin in 2D. Both worked night shifts and weren't home." Detective Mills was quiet for a long moment, watching the smoke still rising from the building. "I need you to walk me through those apartments again once we get the all clear. This is looking like attempted murder." The next 3 hours were the longest of my career. We finished extinguishing the fire and began the overhaul process, but my mind kept racing. Someone had deliberately set this fire, targeting specific apartments, while trying to trap certain residents inside. The only reason Maria Gonzalez and the others were alive was because our response time had been fast and their doors hadn't been completely sealed. As dawn broke over Riverside, Detective Mills pulled me aside. "I'm going to need your crew's statements for the criminal investigation. This fire was set to kill specific people, and whoever did it knew exactly who was supposed to be home tonight." "How do you know?" I asked. "Because they only targeted the apartments with women and elderly residents for the traps, and only set the accelerant fires in apartments where the male tenants were supposed to be at work." His face was stone cold. "Somebody had been watching this building for weeks, learning everyone's schedules." I thought about Maria Gonzalez's terrified face, about how close she'd come to dying not in an accident, but because someone had specifically planned her death. The rain had stopped, but I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Detective," I said, "if someone was watching the building that carefully, they probably know we saved the people they were trying to kill." Mills nodded grimly. "That's exactly what I'm worried about. This isn't over." As I drove home that morning, still smelling like smoke despite 3 showers at the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple arson case. The methodical planning, the intimate knowledge of the residents' schedules, the sophisticated lock tampering, this wasn't some random pyromaniac. This was someone with resources, patience, and a very specific agenda. I didn't know it then, but what we'd discovered at Oakwood Gardens was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, our department would be called to 2 more suspicious fires in the area, each with the same disturbing patterns. And each time, we'd realize we were dealing with someone who saw fire not just as a tool of destruction, but as a precise weapon for eliminating specific targets. The worst part? Whoever was doing this was learning from each fire, adapting their methods, getting better at avoiding detection. And they clearly weren't finished. What's the most suspicious situation you've ever encountered? Have you ever felt like you were being watched or specifically targeted by someone? I never thought I'd see the day when fighting fires would become a matter of criminal investigation, but that night at Oakwood Gardens changed everything about how I look at my job. The call came in on July 27, 2023, around 4:30 p.m. during the height of summer in Bakersfield. I'm Lieutenant Jake Morrison with Engine 19, and I've been fighting wildland fires in Kern County for 8 years. Grass fires are routine for us, especially during fire season when the Central Valley turns into a tinderbox. But what we uncovered that afternoon in the empty lot behind Industrial Boulevard still makes me question everything I thought I knew about my job. The dispatch was straightforward. "Engine 19, grass fire, 2400 block Commerce Street, approximately 2 acres, spreading toward commercial structures. Nothing unusual there. Bakersfield gets dozens of these calls every summer. Kids with firecrackers, cigarette butts, sometimes electrical equipment malfunctioning in the heat. I was riding with engineer Patricia Lopez and firefighter Kevin Walsh that day. We'd been running calls all afternoon, 2 medical assists and a minor fender bender on Highway 99. The temperature was pushing 105 degrees, and the humidity was practically non-existent. Perfect conditions for fire to spread fast. When we pulled up to Commerce Street, I could see the smoke column from half a mile away. The fire was burning in what looked like an abandoned lot between an old auto parts warehouse and a trucking company. Not much around except industrial buildings and cracked asphalt, but with the wind picking up, it could easily jump to the structures. "Looks like about 3 acres involved," Lopez said as she positioned the engine. "Wind's pushing it toward that warehouse." We pulled our hose lines and started setting up for suppression. Standard wildland tactics: create a fire break, hit the head of the fire, work the flanks. Walsh was on the nozzle while Lopez worked the pump panel. I was doing reconnaissance, trying to figure out how the fire started and where it might spread next. That's when I noticed something odd about the burn pattern. Most grass fires start at a single point and spread outward in a rough circle or oval, depending on the wind. But this fire had multiple points of origin, at least 3 separate areas where the grass had started burning simultaneously. "Command, Engine 19. I radioed to Battalion Chief Anderson. "We've got multiple points of origin here. This doesn't look accidental." "Copy that, 19. I'm requesting an investigator. Focus on suppression for now." We knocked down the main body of fire within about 20 minutes. The grass was dry, but there wasn't much fuel load, just the typical Central Valley scrub brush and scattered trash. As we started our mop-up operations, walking through the burned area looking for hot spots, Walsh called out from the southern edge of the burn area. "Lieutenant, you need to come look at this." I walked over to where he was standing with his shovel, working on some smoldering grass roots. The fire had burned off all the vegetation and scattered debris, revealing the bare earth underneath. And there, partially exposed in what looked like a shallow depression, was something that made my blood run cold. It was bone. Human bone. What looked like part of a rib cage, yellowed with age and partially embedded in the dirt. "Jesus Christ," Walsh whispered. "Is that what I think it is?" I keyed my radio immediately. "Command, Engine 19. We need law enforcement and the coroner out here immediately. We've got what appears to be human remains exposed by the fire." "Repeat that, 19. "Human remains, sir. The fire burned off the vegetation and exposed what looks like a burial site." Within 30 minutes, the scene was crawling with investigators. Detective Sarah Campbell from the Bakersfield Police Department took over the scene, along with Deputy Coroner Michael Torres. They established a crime scene perimeter while we continued our mop-up operations in the unaffected areas. But as the afternoon wore on, the discoveries got worse. The fire had burned across an area that turned out to be a makeshift cemetery. Torres and his team found evidence of at least 4 separate burial sites, all shallow graves that had been concealed by the heavy brush and scattered trash. "How long do you think these have been here?" I asked Torres as he worked. He looked up from where he was carefully excavating around what appeared to be a skull. "Based on the condition of the remains, I'd say at least 2 years. Maybe longer. And Lieutenant..." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "These aren't typical burials. No clothing, no personal effects. And the positioning suggests the bodies were dumped here, not buried with any care." Detective Campbell was taking photographs and measurements when she called me over. "Lieutenant Morrison, I need to ask you about this fire. You said multiple points of origin?" "That's right. At least 3 separate areas where it started burning simultaneously. In my experience, that indicates intentional ignition." She nodded grimly. "Someone set this fire to expose these graves. The question is why?" As the investigation continued into the evening, a disturbing picture began to emerge. The burial site was well hidden, You'd never find it unless you knew exactly where to look. The lot had been abandoned for years, overgrown with dense brush that would have made it nearly impossible to spot the graves from the road or nearby buildings. Detective Campbell pulled me aside around 7 p.m. "I got a call from Riverside PD about an hour ago. They've been investigating a series of suspicious fires, including one at an apartment complex where someone was targeting specific tenants. The detective there, Mills, says they've been looking for connections to other cases." My stomach dropped. "You think this is connected?" "I think someone wanted these bodies found. And they use fire to do it, just like they use fire to try to kill those people in Riverside. But here's what's really disturbing. Preliminary examination suggests these victims were all around the same age and demographic as the people who were targeted in that apartment fire." As we wrapped up our operations and prepared to leave the scene, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been used. Someone had deliberately set that fire, knowing we'd respond and discover the graves. But why? Were they trying to send a message? Expose evidence of previous crimes? Or were they cleaning house, destroying evidence of past victims before moving on to new targets? The coroner's team worked through the night, carefully excavating the remains. By morning, they'd confirmed 4 victims, all young adults, all showing signs of trauma that suggested violent deaths. None had been reported as missing persons, which meant they were likely people who lived on the margins, homeless individuals, undocumented immigrants, or others whose disappearances wouldn't generate much attention. Detective Campbell called me 3 days later with an update that made everything even more disturbing. "We've identified 2 of the victims from dental records. Both were residents of low-income housing in different cities, one from Fresno, one from Modesto. Both disappeared within 6 months of each other, about 3 years ago." "Different cities," I repeated. "Like the apartment fire in Riverside." "Exactly. And Lieutenant, there's something else. The fire accelerant we found at your grass fire scene? It matches residue found at the Riverside apartment fire. Same chemical signature." I felt sick. So the same person who tried to kill those people in Riverside also set the fire that exposed these graves. That's what it looks like. And if they're willing to expose their own previous victims, it suggests they're either getting sloppy or they're escalating to something bigger. The case made the local news, but it was buried on page 6 of the Bakersfield Californian. Human remains found after grass fire. Most people probably thought it was just another case of bodies being dumped in an abandoned lot. They had no idea they were looking at evidence of a coordinated campaign of violence that stretched across multiple cities. As firefighters, we're used to being first responders to tragedies. House fires, car accidents, medical emergencies. We see the worst of what can happen to people. But I never expected to become part of a criminal investigation, to realize that someone was using our own emergency response system as a tool in their larger plan. The worst part was the growing certainty that this wasn't over. If someone was willing to expose their own previous crimes, it meant they were confident they wouldn't get caught. Or it meant they were preparing for something so big that these previous murders would seem insignificant by comparison. 3 weeks after the grass fire, Detective Campbell called me again. Her voice was tense. "Lieutenant, we just got word of another suspicious fire. This time it's in Stockton, about 90 miles north of you. Multiple victims, same MO as Riverside. And Jake, the fire was set in a location that would definitely expose more buried evidence if there was any there." I realized we weren't just dealing with an arsonist, or even a serial killer. We were dealing with someone who understood emergency services, who knew how we'd respond, and who was using fires not just to kill people but to send messages and control information. They were always one step ahead of us, anticipating our moves and using them for their own purposes. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every grass fire call we'd run in the past year kept running through my mind. How many crime scenes had we unknowingly walked through? How many times had we been manipulated into serving someone else's agenda without even realizing it? The Bakersfield investigation is still ongoing, but I know it's connected to something much larger. Someone out there is playing a long game, using fire as both a weapon and a tool of revelation. And the most terrifying part is that they seem to know our procedures better than we do. Have you ever realized you were being manipulated without knowing it? Have you ever wondered if the emergencies you see on the news are really accidents, or if someone planned them to look that way? I used to think fires were natural disasters or simple accidents. Now I know that some people use them like chess pieces in a game the rest of us don't even realize we're playing. I never thought I'd be investigating one of my own. After 15 years as a fire investigator for the Ohio State Fire Marshal's Office, I've seen arsonists from every walk of life: insurance fraudsters, revenge seekers, pyromaniacs, even corporate saboteurs. But what I discovered on October 5th, 2023, in Stockton, Ohio, shattered everything I believed about the people who dedicate their lives to fighting fires. My name is Chief Investigator Ellen Martinez, and I wish I could say the evidence was wrong. I wish I could say that the patterns I uncovered were just coincidence, that the insider knowledge displayed in these fires could have come from somewhere else. But after 3 months of investigation, there was no denying the truth. Someone wearing our badge, someone we trusted with our lives, was using their position to commit murder. The call came in at 2:47 a.m. on that cold October morning. Another suspicious fire, this time at the Willowbrook Senior Care Facility on Pine Road. The Stockton Fire Department had requested a state investigator because the fire patterns looked deliberate, and given the recent incidents in Riverside and Bakersfield, the brass wanted someone with experience in serial arson cases. I drove through the early morning darkness from Columbus, arriving at the scene around 5:30 a.m. The fire was out, but the damage was extensive. The administrative wing of the facility had been completely destroyed, along with what appeared to be most of the resident records and files. Captain Timothy Brooks from the Stockton Fire Department met me at the command post. "Chief Martinez, thanks for coming out. We've got a real problem here." "What's the situation, Captain?" 23 residents evacuated safely, no injuries. "But this fire..." He shook his head. "It started in 3 separate locations simultaneously, all in areas that would cause maximum damage to the facility's operations while giving residents time to escape. It's like someone knew exactly how to hurt the business without hurting the people." That immediately raised red flags. Most arsonists don't care about casualties. They're either trying to kill people or they're completely indifferent to human life. Someone who could set a devastating fire while ensuring no one got hurt had professional knowledge of fire behavior and evacuation procedures. As I began my examination of the scene, the evidence painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The accelerant had been placed with surgical precision, enough to ensure total destruction of the administrative areas, but positioned to give residents and staff maximum time to evacuate safely. The fire had been started near the emergency exits, forcing evacuees to use the main entrance where they'd be clearly visible to emergency responders. But it was the timing that really caught my attention. The fire had started at 2:15 a.m., just after the night shift change at the local fire station. Whoever set this fire knew exactly when the overnight crew would be fresh and alert, ensuring the fastest possible response time. "Captain Brooks." I called him over as I examined the point of origin near the facility's main office. "Who called this in?" "Anonymous tip to 911. Caller said they saw smoke coming from the building and thought it might be a fire." "Did they get a trace on the call?" "Came from a burner phone, untraceable." But here's the weird part. The caller knew enough to tell dispatch about the facility's backup generator and medical equipment, stuff you'd only know if you'd been inside the building before. I spent the next 6 hours documenting the scene, collecting samples, and interviewing staff. The facility administrator, a woman named Rebecca Thomas, was particularly helpful. "Chief Martinez, I have to tell you something," she said as we talked in the parking lot. "We've had some strange incidents over the past few months. Nothing I could really put my finger on, but..." "What kind of incidents?" "People asking questions they shouldn't have known to ask. A few weeks ago, someone from the fire department came by for what they said was a routine inspection. They spent a lot of time looking at our resident files, asking about our most vulnerable patients. Said they needed to know for evacuation planning. My blood ran cold. Do you remember who it was? A lieutenant, I think. Tall guy, maybe in his 40s. Said his name was Johnson or Jackson, something like that. He had all the right credentials, knew all the right procedures. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I called the Stockton Fire Department immediately. Captain Brooks checked their records. No inspections had been scheduled for Willowbrook's senior care. No Lieutenant Johnson or Jackson on their roster. Someone had impersonated a fire department official to case the facility. That afternoon, I drove back to Columbus and started running the evidence through our state database. The accelerant samples, the fire patterns, the MO, everything pointed to the same perpetrator as the Riverside and Bakersfield incidents. But now I had something new, evidence that the arsonist had detailed knowledge of fire department procedures and access to official credentials convincing enough to fool facility administrators. I called Detective Mills in Riverside and Detective Campbell in Bakersfield. We arranged a conference call for that evening to compare notes. Ellen, I've been waiting for your call, Mills said. We've had some developments here that you need to know about. That apartment fire back in March? We've discovered that someone accessed our department's database 2 days before the fire, pulling resident information for that specific building. Internal access? I asked. Had to be. The login credentials belonged to one of our fire prevention officers, but he was on vacation in Mexico that week. Someone used his access while he was gone. Detective Campbell chimed in from Bakersfield. Same thing here. Our IT department found unauthorized access to emergency response databases the day before the grass fire. Someone pulled detailed maps of that area, including information about soil conditions and buried utilities. Information that would help them know exactly where to dig those graves. The picture was becoming horrifically clear. We weren't dealing with an outsider who had somehow learned about fire department procedures. We were dealing with someone inside the system, someone with legitimate access to our databases, our procedures, our personnel information. I need to see personnel files, I told both detectives. Anyone who had access to the databases during the time frames of these incidents. And I need to cross-reference with personnel who might have worked in multiple departments, or had access to multi-jurisdictional information. It took 2 weeks of investigation, but the pattern finally emerged. There had been a training seminar in Sacramento 6 months before the first fire, a multi-agency workshop on arson investigation techniques. Attendees included fire department personnel from Riverside, Bakersfield, Stockton, and a dozen other California and neighboring state departments. One name appeared on the attendance roster that made my stomach drop: Lieutenant Christopher Davis from the Fresno Fire Department. The same Lieutenant Davis who had been quietly transferred between 3 different departments over the past 5 years following personnel issues that were never fully documented. The same Lieutenant Davis who had comprehensive knowledge of emergency response protocols, database access, and investigative procedures. When I pulled his full personnel file, the pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Davis had been a firefighter for 12 years, but his career had been marked by complaints about his interest in the more disturbing aspects of the job. Colleagues reported that he spent too much time at crime scenes, asked too many questions about victims, and seemed fascinated by the psychological profiles of criminals they encountered. More disturbing were the incident reports. Every department where Davis had worked had experienced an unusual number of suspicious fires. Nothing that created a clear pattern at the time. They were spread across different jurisdictions and different years. But when viewed together, it was obvious that someone with insider knowledge had been systematically setting fires to cover up previous crimes while eliminating potential witnesses. The Riverside apartment fire wasn't just about killing those specific tenants. It was about eliminating people who might have witnessed Davis dumping bodies at the Bakersfield site years earlier. The grass fire that exposed the burial ground wasn't a random act. It was Davis clearing evidence before moving to a new hunting ground. And Stockton? The senior care facility fire had destroyed records that might have connected Davis to missing persons cases from his time working in Ohio. Residents and staff who might have remembered his face, his questions, his suspicious behavior. On October 19th, we coordinated with multiple agencies to arrest Lieutenant Christopher Davis at his home in Fresno. What we found there confirmed our worst fears. Davis had been collecting information on vulnerable populations across multiple states for years. Files on homeless individuals, elderly residents of care facilities, immigrant communities, anyone whose disappearance wouldn't generate much attention. His computer contained detailed surveillance photos of potential victims, emergency response schedules for multiple jurisdictions, and most chilling of all, what appeared to be a target list of emergency responders who might have gotten too close to discovering his activities. My name was on that list. So were Detective Mills and Detective Campbell. So were half a dozen firefighters and investigators who had worked the scenes of his fires. During his interrogation, Davis was completely calm, almost proud of his work. "You have no idea how easy it is," he told us. "People trust firefighters. They let us into their homes, their businesses, their lives. They tell us their secrets, show us their vulnerabilities. And when something bad happens, we're the first ones on scene. We control the narrative." He had been using his position not just to commit crimes, but to manipulate the investigations afterward. Evidence that disappeared from crime scenes. Witness statements that were lost or misfiled. Investigation reports that minimized suspicious elements. For over a decade, Davis had been committing murders and using his insider knowledge to ensure they were never properly investigated. The scope of his crimes was staggering. We've identified at least 17 victims across 4 states, with more cases being reviewed. Every fire he set, every crime scene he manipulated, every investigation he subverted, it was all part of a systematic campaign to use the emergency services system as his personal hunting ground. What haunts me most is how long he got away with it. Davis understood our procedures better than we did. He knew our blind spots, our jurisdictional limitations, our tendency to treat fires as isolated incidents rather than part of larger patterns. He played us like a chess master, always 3 moves ahead. The Willowbrook Senior Care fire was supposed to be his last. After that, he planned to retire and disappear, leaving behind a trail of cold cases that would never be connected. If he hadn't gotten overconfident, if he hadn't made that one mistake of impersonating a fire inspector, we might never have caught him. Davis is now serving multiple life sentences without parole. But the damage he did to our profession, to the trust between emergency responders and the communities we serve, will take decades to repair. Every time I put on my badge now, I wonder who else might be hiding behind the uniform. How many other Christopher Davises are out there, using our good intentions and our access to vulnerable people for their own twisted purposes? The most terrifying part wasn't that a monster existed, it was that he had been one of us all along. Someone we trusted, someone we worked alongside, someone we would have laid down our lives to save. And he had been using that trust to destroy the very people we swore to protect. Have you ever realized that someone you trusted completely was living a double life? Have you ever wondered if the people you work with every day might be hiding something dark? I used to think the worst part of my job was investigating the aftermath of tragedies. Now I know the worst part is discovering that sometimes the tragedy was caused by someone standing right next to you. The phone call that changed everything came at 11:47 p.m. on December 3, 2023. I'm Captain Angela Foster with the Phoenix Fire Department, and in my 19 years of service, I've never felt terror like I did that night when we realized what Lieutenant Christopher Davis had been planning before his arrest. What we discovered in his storage unit wasn't just evidence of past crimes, it was a blueprint for mass murder that would have made 9/11 look like a practice run. I was at home, finally getting some sleep after a brutal shift, when my phone rang. It was Deputy Chief Robert Sterling, and his voice was shaking. "Angela, I need you to get down to the department immediately. We've got a situation with the Davis investigation that you need to see." "Chief, it's almost midnight. Can't this wait until morning?" "No, it can't. The FBI found something. Get here now." I threw on my uniform and drove through the empty Phoenix streets, my mind racing. Davis had been arrested 6 weeks earlier, and we'd thought the nightmare was over. My department had been cooperating with the multi-state investigation, reviewing our procedures, checking our personnel files. We'd found evidence that Davis had accessed our databases during his brief assignment to a training program here 2 years ago, but nothing suggested he'd planned any attacks in Phoenix. When I arrived at the station, I found Deputy Chief Sterling in his office with FBI Special Agent Michelle Wright and 2 other federal agents I didn't recognize. The conference table was covered with photographs, documents, and what looked like architectural blueprints. "Captain Foster," Agent Wright said as I entered. "Thank you for coming. We need to brief you on what we found in Davis's secondary storage unit in Tempe." "Secondary storage unit?" "The one he rented under a false identity. We found it 3 hours ago." She pointed to the documents spread across the table. "Captain, Davis wasn't just planning random fires. He was planning something that would have killed hundreds of people and crippled emergency response capabilities across the entire Southwest." Agent Wright walked me through the evidence, and with each revelation, I felt sicker. Davis had been collecting detailed intelligence on major public events in Arizona, California, Nevada, and New Mexico. Concert venues, sports stadiums, convention centers, anywhere large crowds gathered in enclosed spaces with limited exits. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was his target selection criteria. Davis hadn't just been choosing locations based on potential casualties. He'd been choosing them based on which fires would require the largest multi-agency response, drawing firefighters, paramedics, and police from across multiple jurisdictions to single locations. He was planning to set multiple fires simultaneously, Agent Wright explained, each one designed to draw maximum emergency response. Then, while first responders were committed to these decoy fires, he planned to target the emergency personnel themselves. She showed me photographs of explosive devices, not just incendiary materials, but actual bombs designed to kill firefighters and paramedics. Devices that would be triggered by the vibrations of our equipment, the heat signatures of our gear, even the radio frequencies we use to communicate. "Captain," Deputy Chief Sterling said quietly, "look at this." He handed me a thick folder labeled Phoenix Fire Department, Operational Protocols. Inside were detailed schematics of our stations, our response routes, our communication procedures. Davis had mapped out exactly how we'd respond to major incidents, where we'd stage our equipment, how we'd coordinate with other agencies. More terrifying, he'd identified the choke points, intersections, bridges, and highway on-ramps where he could trap responding units with secondary devices. Not just to delay our response, but to eliminate entire crews while they were en route to help people. "When was he planning to execute this?" I asked. Agent Wright's expression was grim. "New Year's Eve. He had everything timed for the celebrations in downtown Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles simultaneously. Thousands of people gathered in confined spaces, celebrating, drinking, not paying attention to exits or safety protocols." She showed me the timeline he'd developed. Starting at 11:30 p.m. Pacific Time, Davis planned to trigger fires at major venues in all 3 cities. Each fire would be designed to cause maximum panic, while ensuring that people couldn't escape quickly. Then, as emergency units responded, secondary devices would eliminate the first responders. The psychological warfare aspect was the most disturbing. Davis understood that emergency services personnel are hardwired to run toward danger, to put civilians' safety above their own. He was planning to use our instincts and training against us, turning our commitment to serve and protect into a death trap. "How close was he to pulling this off?" I asked. "Closer than we want to admit," Agent Wright replied. "We found receipts showing he'd already acquired most of the materials he needed. The explosive devices were nearly complete. He had detailed reconnaissance photos of all the target locations taken within the past month." Deputy Chief Sterling pointed to another stack of documents. "Angela, he had backup plans too. If the New Year's Eve operation failed or was discovered, he had secondary targets identified for Valentine's Day, 4th of July, even specific dates tied to local events like spring training games and county fairs." The scope was staggering. Davis hadn't been planning a single attack, he'd been developing a sustainable campaign of terror that could have continued for years. Each operation would have refined his methods, eliminated emergency personnel who might catch on to his patterns, and progressively weakened our ability to respond to future attacks. But perhaps most chilling was his recruitment strategy. Among the documents, we found evidence that Davis had been identifying other emergency services personnel who might be vulnerable to recruitment. Firefighters with financial problems, paramedics with disciplinary issues, police officers with grievances against their departments. He was building a network, Agent Wright explained. People inside multiple agencies who could provide intelligence, sabotage equipment, or even participate directly in attacks. We've identified at least 12 emergency services personnel across 4 states who Davis had been cultivating. Are they under arrest? Most of them don't even know they were being recruited. Davis was subtle. He'd offer to help with their problems, provide financial assistance, build relationships of trust and dependency. Then gradually he'd ask for small favors. Information about response protocols, schedules, equipment locations. By the time they realized what they were involved in, they'd already be complicit. The psychological manipulation was as sophisticated as the operational planning. Davis understood that most emergency services personnel are fundamentally good people who want to help others. He exploited that goodness, gradually corrupting people by making them feel they owed him something, then escalating his requests until they were trapped. We spent the next 4 hours going through every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence. The FBI had already begun arresting the personnel Davis had compromised, but several were still unaccounted for. People who might not even realize they were part of his network, but who had access to information or resources that could still be dangerous. Around 4 a.m., Agent Wright pulled me aside. "Captain Foster, there's something else. We found your name in Davis's files." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of files?" "Intelligence files." Davis had been collecting information about key personnel and emergency services across the region. People who might interfere with his operations, people who might be threats to his network. She handed me a folder with my name on it. "You were on his elimination list." The folder contained everything about me. My home address, my daily routines, my family members' schedules. Photographs of my house, my car, even my kids' schools. Davis had been planning to kill me, not as part of his mass casualty events, but as targeted elimination of someone he saw as a threat to his larger operation. "How many others?" I asked. 47 emergency services personnel across the 4-state region. Fire chiefs, police captains, paramedic supervisors, emergency management directors. Anyone with the authority and experience to recognize patterns or coordinate multi-agency responses. The implication was horrifying. Davis hadn't just been planning to kill random civilians. He'd been planning to systematically eliminate the emergency response infrastructure itself, leaving entire regions unable to respond effectively to disasters, whether natural or man-made. As dawn broke over Phoenix, I realized we'd only discovered this plot by accident. If Davis hadn't gotten careless with the senior care facility fire in Ohio, if the investigators hadn't connected the patterns across multiple states, he might have succeeded. Hundreds of people would have died on New Year's Eve, and we would have been powerless to stop him. The FBI continued their investigation for months, uncovering additional storage units, safe houses, and supply caches that Davis had established across the Southwest. The final tally was staggering: enough explosive materials to level city blocks, detailed intelligence on dozens of potential targets, and a network of unwitting accomplices that stretched across multiple states and agencies. Several emergency services personnel were arrested and charged with conspiracy, though most received relatively light sentences because they'd been manipulated rather than willing participants. Our departments implemented new security protocols, background check procedures, and psychological screening programs to prevent similar infiltration in the future. But the psychological impact on our profession was devastating. Every new hire, every transfer, every training program now carries the shadow of suspicion. We look at our colleagues differently. wondering if they might be compromised, if they might be feeding information to someone with malicious intent. The most disturbing aspect of Davis's plan wasn't the bombs or the fires, it was how thoroughly he understood us. Our procedures, our psychology, our commitment to helping people. He turned our greatest strengths into vulnerabilities, our dedication into a weapon against us. 6 months later, I still wake up some nights thinking about what could have happened. Thousands of families celebrating New Year's Eve, counting down to midnight, completely unaware that they were walking into a trap. Emergency responders racing to help people, not knowing they were driving toward their own deaths. Davis is serving multiple life sentences in federal prison, but the damage he did to our profession's sense of security and trust will take decades to heal. Every time we respond to a major incident now, there's a small voice in the back of our minds asking, is this real, or is someone using our response against us? The hardest part is knowing that Davis might not have been unique. Somewhere out there, another person with inside knowledge of emergency services might be planning their own campaign of terror. Someone else who understands our procedures well enough to turn them into weapons, our dedication well enough to use it against us. We caught Davis before he could execute his final plan, but only barely. And the question that haunts all of us is, how many other Christopher Davises are out there, watching us, learning our patterns, waiting for their opportunity to turn our commitment to serve and protect into something deadly? Have you ever realized that your job skills could be used for harmful purposes? Do you think enough about the security of your workplace systems and procedures? I used to think the biggest threat to firefighters was the fires themselves. Now I know the biggest threat might be the person standing right next to you, wearing the same uniform, carrying the same badge. They say Christopher Davis died in prison on February 24, 2024, just 3 months after his sentencing. A heart attack, the warden told us. Quick and quiet, no drama. But what happened 8 weeks later in Las Vegas made me realize that even in death, Davis had found a way to strike back at the people who destroyed his plans. I'm Fire Marshal Jennifer Walsh with the Clark County Fire Department, and I'm the one who discovered that Davis had programmed his final revenge to activate automatically, even if he wasn't alive to see it. The call came in at 6:43 a.m. on April 18, 2024. Multiple structure fires reported across the Las Vegas Valley. All units respond. As I listened to the dispatch chatter while driving to the first scene, I felt a familiar chill. 3 separate fires, all started within minutes of each other, all in locations that would require maximum emergency response. It was exactly what Davis had planned for New Year's Eve, the operation we'd stopped just in time 3 months earlier. The first fire was at the Sunset Medical Center on University Avenue, a busy hospital that would require evacuating hundreds of patients. The second was at McCarran Elementary School on Elm Drive, thankfully empty at that early hour but still requiring a major response due to the threat to surrounding neighborhoods. The third was at the Desert Palms Retirement Community on Cedar Lane, dozens of elderly residents who would need assistance evacuating. As I arrived at the medical center, I could see that this wasn't just another coordinated arson attack. The fires were too precise, too perfectly timed, too much like Davis's signature style. But Davis was dead. I'd seen the death certificate myself. Captain Ronald Mitchell from Engine 14 met me in the parking lot. "Marshal Walsh, this is bad. The fire started in multiple locations simultaneously, all designed to force evacuation through specific routes. It's like someone had detailed knowledge of our emergency response protocols. Any casualties? None yet, but we've got over 200 patients to move, and the evacuation routes are compromised by smoke and structural damage. Whoever planned this knew exactly how to create maximum chaos while keeping people alive long enough to..." He stopped mid-sentence. "Long enough to what, Captain?" "Long enough to trap our response teams. Marshal, I've been doing this for 22 years, and I've never seen fire behavior like this. It's like the building was designed to become a maze once the fires started." I spent the next 4 hours coordinating the multi-incident response, but with each passing hour, the similarities to Davis's planning became more obvious. The accelerant placement, the timing, the strategic positioning to overwhelm our resources. It was all from his playbook. But there were differences too. These fires seemed designed not to kill civilians, but to exhaust and trap emergency responders. The evacuation routes were compromised just enough to slow us down, not enough to prevent escape. The structural damage was calculated to create dangerous working conditions for firefighters without causing immediate collapse. Someone was using Davis's methods, but with a different objective. Instead of mass casualties, they wanted to eliminate emergency personnel who had been involved in stopping Davis's original plans. By afternoon, we'd controlled all 3 fires and completed evacuations with no civilian casualties. But 7 firefighters and 3 paramedics had been injured by equipment failures, structural collapses, and equipment that malfunctioned at critical moments. All minor injuries, but the pattern was disturbing. That evening, I was reviewing incident reports when I got a call from FBI agent Michelle Wright, who had led the Davis investigation. "Jennifer, I need you to look at something. We found Davis's final storage unit today, one we didn't know existed. It was programmed to be accessible only after his death, with instructions that were automatically sent to a law firm if he didn't check in every 30 days. What kind of instructions? Revenge protocols. Davis had anticipated that he might be caught or killed before completing his plans, so he created automated systems to continue his work posthumously. Agent Wright sent me digital copies of what they'd found. Davis had spent years creating detailed contingency plans, not just for continuing his attacks, but for specifically targeting the people who had interfered with his operations. Every investigator, every fire chief, every emergency services leader who had played a role in exposing him was on a target list with specific instructions for elimination. The Las Vegas fires weren't random. They were field tests for equipment and tactics that would be used in targeted assassinations. The injured firefighters were all people who had provided testimony that helped convict Davis. The equipment failures were caused by devices that had been installed months earlier by personnel who were part of Davis's network but had never been identified. "How is this happening if Davis is dead?" I asked. "He recruited people and gave them sealed instructions that were only to be opened after his death. Most of them don't even know they're part of a posthumous revenge plot. They think they're following orders from Davis himself, delivered through intermediaries." The scope was staggering. Davis had identified emergency services personnel who were financially vulnerable, emotionally isolated, or harboring grievances against their departments. He'd provided them with money, support, and a sense of belonging, then given them sealed instructions to be opened only in case of emergency. His death had triggered those emergency protocols across multiple states. "Agent Wright, how many people are we talking about?" "We've identified at least 37 emergency services personnel who received sealed instructions from Davis. Some have already acted on them without realizing what they were doing. Others are probably planning actions right now." The psychological manipulation was more sophisticated than anything we'd seen before. Davis had convinced these people that they were part of a legitimate emergency preparedness program, that the sealed instructions contained vital information for protecting their communities in case of catastrophic events. In reality, the instructions contained detailed plans for sabotaging equipment, compromising response protocols, and eliminating specific individuals who had interfered with Davis's original operations. Over the next 72 hours, we worked with federal agents to identify and arrest Davis's posthumous accomplices. The pattern was consistent. Emergency services personnel who had been gradually compromised over months or years, given financial assistance and emotional support, then provided with sealed instructions they believed were legitimate emergency protocols. Firefighter Mark Johnson in Albuquerque had been installing equipment designed to cause accidental failures during major incidents. Paramedic Lisa Chin in Sacramento had been altering medication protocols to cause delayed reactions in specific patients. Police Sergeant Gary Thompson in Denver had been providing intelligence on witness protection locations to people he thought were federal agents. None of them realized they were part of a dead man's revenge plot. The most disturbing discovery came when we searched Davis's final storage unit. Along with the revenge protocols, we found detailed psychological profiles of hundreds of emergency services personnel across the western United States. Davis had been building a recruitment database for years, identifying people who could be manipulated into serving his agenda. But he'd also been collecting intelligence on people like me, investigators and administrators who couldn't be compromised. For us, he developed elimination protocols that were designed to look like accidents or equipment failures. On April 25th, exactly 1 week after the Las Vegas fires, I received a package at my home address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with my photograph and a detailed schedule of my daily routines. At the bottom, in Davis's handwriting, was a simple message. "You stopped my life's work. Now my death will stop yours." That same day, packages were delivered to Chief Investigator Alan Martinez in Ohio, Captain Angela Foster in Phoenix, and Lieutenant Jake Morrison in Bakersfield, all of us who had played key roles in exposing Davis's network. The FBI immediately placed us under protective custody while they worked to identify and neutralize the remaining posthumous threats. We learned that Davis had created what he called dead man switches, automated systems that would activate revenge protocols if he failed to check in regularly. His death had triggered a cascading series of events designed to eliminate everyone who had interfered with his plans, destroy evidence of his network, and create chaos within emergency services across multiple states. It took 6 months to fully dismantle Davis's posthumous revenge network. 37 emergency services personnel were arrested, though most received relatively light sentences because they'd been manipulated rather than willing participants in murder plots. More disturbing were the personnel who had been compromised but never activated, sleeper agents within fire departments, police agencies, and emergency medical services who had been provided with sealed instructions they never opened because the specific trigger conditions were never met. We'll probably never know how many people Davis compromised over the years, how many emergency services personnel are still carrying sealed instructions that could be activated by future events or communications. The psychological impact on our profession has been devastating. Every piece of equipment could be sabotaged. Every new hire could be compromised. Every sealed envelope or unusual maintenance request could be part of a larger plot to use our own systems against us. But perhaps most disturbing is the realization that Davis's influence extended beyond his death. He'd created a network of people who believed they were doing good, who thought they were protecting their communities, who had no idea they were being used as weapons against the very people they'd sworn to serve alongside. 6 months after Davis's death, I still checked my equipment twice before every call. I still wonder about colleagues who seem too interested in our protocols, too curious about our schedules, too eager to help with tasks they shouldn't need to be involved in. The final count of Davis's victims, both before and after his death, was 34 people across 7 states. But the count of people whose trust in their profession, their colleagues, and their own judgment was destroyed is much higher. We caught Davis and stopped his major plots, but his final lesson was the most chilling of all: true evil doesn't end with death. It plants seeds that can grow and spread long after the original source is gone, turning good people into unwitting accomplices, trusted systems into weapons, and professional dedication into vulnerability. Every day, I wonder if Davis had other contingency plans we haven't discovered yet. Other storage units with other triggers. Other compromised personnel with other sealed instructions, waiting for conditions we can't even imagine. The most terrifying part isn't what Davis did while he was alive, it's what he might still be doing now that he's dead. And the knowledge that somewhere out there, good people who think they're protecting their communities might be carrying instructions that could turn them into the very threat they've dedicated their lives to fighting. The Davis case officially closed 8 months after his death, but I know it's not really over. It may never be over. Because the worst part about evil isn't that it exists, it's that it's patient, it's clever, and it understands that the best way to destroy good people isn't to attack them directly, but to trick them into destroying themselves. Have you ever wondered if you've been manipulated into doing something harmful without realizing it? Do you think about how easy it would be for someone to exploit your good intentions and use them against the people you care about? I used to believe that as long as we had good people in emergency services, we'd be able to protect our communities. Now I know that sometimes, the most dangerous person isn't the obvious villain, it's the good person who's been convinced they're doing the right thing for all the wrong reasons. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.